Hey guys, so welcome back. In my last video, which you should definitely watch first if you have not seen that yet, I was mainly focusing on the fact that the abuse of Lyle and Erik Menendez actually took place because I see so many videos and podcasts and what have you that cover this case and just dismiss the abuse, say there was no evidence, and that's just not true. So that's mainly what the point of the last video was. But today I want to go a little bit deeper and I want to debunk some of the myths and lies that have been told about this case, especially in a certain recent, very popular video. I want to talk about why the abuse is important as well. It's not just, oh, they were abused, like, feel sorry for them. That's not the point. There's actual reasons why the abuse led directly to the killing. And to start off, I guess the thing we should do is take a look at the parents. Jose and Kitty Menendez were the type of parents who never saw their children as people. Their children were their property. They had to obey them and essentially prove themselves worthy of their existence, making the family look good by winning trophies or other things they could brag about. It also meant that they could do whatever they wanted to them, hurt them or use them or attempt to shape them into the people they wanted them to be. Jose was, in my opinion, a sociopath with no ability or desire, really, to empathize with others.
And here is what they say, bear with me, about Jose Menendez. Very strict, sarcastic, ultimate control freak, belittling, ridiculing, humiliating, successful, reserved, private, image conscious, cruel, clearly cruel, controlling, intelligent, apparently very intelligent, angry, strong-willed, very competitive, the understatement of the century, arrogant, intense, belligerent, manipulative, powerful, rude, nasty, never satisfied, had a cut you to shreds tone of voice, was aggressive, frightening, intimidating, cruel, harshest person ever met. He had to win. He was overbearing, confrontational, demeaning, abusive, sadistic, sarcastic, controlling, fake, secretive, demanding, cold, competitive, arrogant, angry, and belittling.
One of the sickest things is that Jose and Kitty were able to raise Lyle and Erik to be their perfect victims. Jose and Kitty had different motivations for sexually abusing their sons. I think that Jose was a sex addict and a sadist who would use anyone he had access to meet his own perverse needs. I also believe he did specifically have an interest in children. In this tiny little article from the New York Post from December of 1993, Sherry Woods makes very similar accusations against Jose Menendez as his sons did. Woods was a madam, which is like a fancy way of saying pimp, who provided call girls to very wealthy people. She said that he specifically requested girls who were no more than 15 years old and petite. Sherry did not send him underage kids, but she says she sent girls who looked young. Once, she said, he tried to strangle a very sweet girl as he had sex with her. She was so scared she refused to go back to him, regardless of how much he wanted to pay her. She goes on to say he was into aggressive fantasies. She finally stopped accepting his calls when one girl came back covered in bruises and scratches. This lines up with what Lyle and Erik said about the violent component to the molestation, especially in regards to Erik. I mean, the things that happened to him in that respect are just so awful, I don't even like to repeat them. But the sadism wasn't only sexual, it also came out in other ways. How he would constantly verbally humiliate people, or the thing he would do of shutting Erik and Lyle in the shower and turning it all the way on hot or all the way on cold. Other people existed for his gratification, including his, or especially his two boys. What a lot of people have been pointing out is the fact that the parents each molested their least favorite child. This was no coincidence. When predators victimize children outside their families, they often choose a victim who is neglected or abused at home. They then exploit that need for nurturing and caring. Kitty and Jose, though, directly created that need themselves and then exploited it.
And the prospect of this little human experiment to create, first with the firstborn, a little Jose, and then with the secondborn, Jose's perfect toy.
Jose constantly bullied, belittled, and ignored his younger son, telling him frequently that he wasn't good enough to be a Menendez, that he was a sissy, why couldn't he be more like his brother? If Erik so much as tried to speak in his early life, Jose would tell him to shut up or hit him.
Shut up and go away. And why can't you just shut up and go away? And my brother would just stand there. And my dad would have to push him away, or he would hit him.
The only time Jose was nice, quote, to Erik was when he was sexually abusing him. Because Erik so desperately wanted his father to love him, it made him receptive to this early part of the abuse.
I wanted to be liked as much as Lyle.
Jose, of course, abused Lyle in this way as well, but eventually stopped for whatever reason. For Erik, though, it kept going. And the nice facade didn't last long. As Erik got older, the sexual abuse became more and more violent and sadistic. He used the grooming at the beginning to get him to a point, and then the violence and the death threats trapped him there. Kitty was described by her family members as having hated her older son Lyle from the minute he was born, and she was not shy about letting people know, in her words and in her actions.
These are the descriptions that people gave of Mary Louise Menendez. Extremely competitive. And then we have immense temper, which is a descriptor that Alan Anderson gave. Non-interfering refers to the fact that she never would stop Jose from doing the things he did to the kids. Enraged, angry, sarcastic, hostile.
Lyle was her punching bag. He was who she took out her anger and frustration on. But, just like her husband, she reserved one time, and one time only, to be nice to Lyle, when she was sexually abusing him.
And I was hoping that things were going to get better for our whole relationship, and things might get better. And she got worse.
Did you think she was going to love you if you did these things?
I took it to be love.
She abused him in this way from around the age of 11 to 13, and just like with Erik and Jose, he was receptive of it at first because he so desperately wanted her to love him. He wanted to do this not because he liked it, but because he wanted to make her happy, until he was 13 and realized he didn't want to do these things anymore. The reason the parents were able to do all these horrible things to their kids, all the different forms of abuse, is because, in my opinion, they just did not respect Lyle and Erik as human beings. They were their property. What they wanted and how they felt was unimportant. And what do you think happens to a kid who is taught that they have no right to their own thoughts, their own emotions, or their own bodies? See, I think the thing the why didn't they just leave crowd is missing is that child abuse isn't just bad because it hurts. There's trauma. It changes how a person's brain actually develops. Like, Lyle and Erik were not average 21 and 18-year-old kids. Being sexually assaulted once can damage a person for life. The abuse isn't some sob story, it led directly to the killing, as I've said. Something really important the defense did is they had several psychologists evaluate the brothers, and they did this over a period of many months. And I would suggest you go and watch these in full if you haven't, but I've cut together a few highlights to help explain a little better.
Are there other behaviors by the adult that can ensure that the child keeps the secret besides the threat of violence?
Actually doing violence. That's often done.
Doing violence related to telling, or any kind of violence?
Any kind of violence, because that then the model has been set, that the act has been done, and that's not an illogical connection for a child to make between he said something would happen, he has done something, so therefore, if I ever reveal the secret, very serious consequences will await me. Well, without the actual threat of violence, what seems to occur, what clearly occurs, is the age of the child, the helplessness of the child, and that is what is overwhelming by the adult's behavior. You don't have to have a weapon or something to clearly threaten a child. Just one size And that factor is clearly overwhelming to the child.
And in your neurobiological model, is it therefore at least believed that children who have been exposed to these situations, who have these overwhelming stress reaction and dissociate or numb, does that leave them with these symptoms we've talked about, this high anxiety, high arousal? Do they remain in a state of overstimulation, basically?
Well, they can't stay in a total state of overwhelm. That's just not the way the body operates in any type of situation. So there is what's called some coping, a way of managing it, or actually an adaptation to the abuse. The resetting phenomenon doesn't occur because they're still in the abusive situation if you're talking about a ongoing type of situation.
And they're so plugged in, these kinds of children in these families, to the family myths of the parents being perfect and the parents always being right, that it doesn't even occur to them that they're being abused, that this is an abnormal family. If Erik had the insight of the prosecution theory is, all right, maybe he's being abused and he's being controlled, and so he figures out, I'm being controlled, this is unfair, I want to get out of here. If he had that much insight into what was going on in the family, he would have been healthy enough to know, hey, I'm walking.
Basically, the abuse made them hypervigilant when it came to assessing danger. Erik and Lyle had always been told that telling anyone of the sexual abuse would get them killed. So, after Lyle's confrontation with Jose over his abuse of Erik, naturally that left the brothers scared. Over the next few days, their fear grew. One reason for that was Erik actually telling Lyle how violent and sadistic the abuse was. This was scary because 1, it reinforced that their parents had no problem hurting them. 2, it showed Lyle an even more depraved side of his father, and 3, it was so awful that Lyle knew his parents would never want anyone to know about it. Then the parents made statements to them like, if you had kept your mouth shut, maybe things would have worked out in this family, and telling Lyle his tennis camp didn't matter anymore. To them, these were signs that their lives would be ending soon. So when you get to that final night where they're told they can't leave the house, Erik is sent to his room and the parents close the den doors, that's just the culmination of all of that fear that's been building up all week, and really their whole lives. People act like it's such a crazy conclusion for them to jump to, but if you raise a child to be fearful of everything, to not trust anyone, tell them you will kill them, what are they supposed to think? These people hurt these 2 boys in every way imaginable. The physical abuse was merciless. Both the parents used them sexually, so why would they ever think they wouldn't kill them? They taught Lyle and Erik that they didn't care about them and that their pain was of no consequence to them. Of course they were scared of these people. Now, moving on to the trial, we're going to talk about the liars, because there were a lot of people who went up on that witness stand and straight up lied. And I'm not just saying that because I didn't like what they were saying or whatever. They were proven to be lying. Jamie Persarsik, Lyle's ex-girlfriend.
In November, long after Erik and Lyle have testified, she tells Detective Zoller the following story. In the spring of 1989, I was at the Menendez home, and Erik overheard a conversation of his mother, which informed him that Lyle wore a toupee.
Can you tell me, to the best of your recollection, when that conversation took place?
The spring of 1989.
Okay, now you had said earlier spring or summer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
But you think now that it wasn't summer, but that it was spring?
I think it was the spring.
And when you say spring, what months are you talking about?
I'm not sure to be exact.
Okay, well, can you get close for us?
It could have been around spring break, so March or April.
But she was working in April, so just spring is now March. And then, of course, out come her work records, which show that there is no way, except for one weekend, that she could have come out here in March.
So you're working March 3rd?
Correct.
Did you look at March 4th? Are you working that day?
Yes.
Did you look at March 5th?
She's sitting up here. She says it happens in the spring. Here comes Miss Lansing with envelope after envelope of her work records and blows her out of the water. She lied. And she shows she lied. And you get down to that one weekend in March, and it is the weekend when Erik isn't there.
It could have been late February. I do not remember exactly when that conversation was.
Okay, so before it was spring or summer. And now it could be February. And if I show you were working every weekend in February, would you then move back to January?
I don't recall the exact time of this conversation. I think I've stated that.
On that warm spring day in January. Oh, I know my brother has a hairpiece. Sure. But not a word of it is ever mentioned around Ed Fenno, who's living in that house all that time.
In analyzing Grant Walker, it is extremely important to look at a number of things. Look at what he has to say. He gets there at 2 o'clock and he's there for 45 minutes. And no one's getting ready to go fishing. They're supposed to be there at 3 o'clock. That doesn't make a lot of sense. He says that the patio furniture, which is by the guest house in this photograph, is here on the walkway between the tennis court and the pool. The table's there and the chairs are there. And Mark Heffernan says it wouldn't fit. Sometimes the parents would put the chairs up there, but they never put the table there because it wouldn't fit. You couldn't get by. And yet he talks about not only the table and chairs being there, but that he's walking back and forth, repairing the pool. He says in his interview with the police, Erik and Mom, and this is in July of 1993, are having an argument. And both boys are on the court. Now his testimony here is Kitty and Jose and Erik on the outside, Lyle on the tennis court, and Lyle in a fight with his mother. His version on the radio in August of 93 is Erik on the tennis court, having a fit because of a missed shot, using foul language, apparently directed at nobody. The parents aren't saying anything. And he then says hi to the pool man. And then we have Mr. Bartek's version, who says Mr. Walker told him the fight was between Erik and Dad.
And my question is, did you ever tell an investigator that you could be mistaken about the tennis coach having dark hair?
No.
And you're pretty sure that he had dark hair at this point?
Yes.
It also goes against the proven fact that they were on a shark fishing boat at 3 o'clock on that day. Detective Valentine claims he saw Lyle at the US Open on a specific date and time. It was proven that Lyle could not have been there during that day and time.
Well, Mr. Valentine, if I were to tell you that there's been evidence presented in this trial that on the morning of August 31st, Lyle Menendez was in an airplane on his way to Los Angeles, would that change your recollection?
At what time?
During the morning hours of August 31st, Lyle Menendez was on an airplane from Newark Airport on his way to Los Angeles, California.
I'd have to say your information is incorrect.
I see. They put him on knowing what he's saying cannot be true. Now, they know they're going to call Pat Heffernan as a witness in order to testify that she loaned her American Express card to Erik. Okay? They're in touch with her. She's going to be a witness in the case. This is not a mystery. They are putting on perjury, this is known as, lying under oath in a big way.
Dr. Oziel. This guy told so many lies, it's ridiculous. He testified for days, and if I go digging through all of that, this video would have never come out. but you can go and watch his and Judalon Smith's testimonies if you don't believe me. The prosecution wanted him to prove Lyle and Erik had planned the crime. See, he was the therapist Erik confessed to, but he was completely discredited. He had these tapes of supposed therapy sessions, but only one actually had Lyle and Erik on it, and we'll talk more about that one in a minute. The rest are just him summarizing these sessions, which should be suspicious enough, but a lot of the things he claims were on those tapes aren't even there. He claimed Lyle threatened him. Judalon Smith, who was there, says he didn't. He claimed Judalon wasn't listening to the therapy session through the door. She says she was, and he had asked her to. Judalon Smith recorded a bunch of phone calls with him. On these tapes, he admits he was not afraid of the boys. He doesn't outright say the words, "I am blackmailing the brothers for money," but he heavily implies it.
The tape in which he's saying to Judalon Smith after the boys are arrested, remember, there's $14 million at stake here. There's also that bizarre tape in which he tells Judalon to disguise her voice, pretend to be Erik Menendez, and threaten his wife.
This guy proved himself to be 100% untrustworthy, and several people who worked with him or worked for him in the past also testified, as Judalon Smith did, that he was completely untrustworthy. Craig Signorelli was Erik's friend. He claims he was at the Beverly Hills house on September 1st when the computer tech was there, and that Erik confessed a very specific version of the shooting to him. Erik's other friend, Casey Whalen, however, testified that he was the one who was at the Beverly Hills house on September 1st when the computer tech was there, and his sister and his mom both back him up on this, and Casey Whalen fits the original description that the computer tech and his wife gave of the friend, being someone with a heavier build and sandy hair, whereas Craig Signorelli was thinner at the time, even than he was on the stand, where he's still thinner than Casey, and he has jet black hair. Marzi Eisenberg, Jose's secretary. She tells this story that she's in the limo on the way to the memorial service, and Lyle makes this kind of morbid joke and points out that he's wearing his father's loafers.
Now, it seems odd that the secretary would be in the limousine with Erik and Lyle, who hardly know her, instead of the grandmother or the aunts and uncles and cousins who are out here. Seems like a rather strange situation. And she repeats a conversation, or tells you about a conversation about Lyle wearing his father's shoes. Now, I'm not sure how this is supposed to help you decide the facts of this case, other than maybe the idea is that he wanted to take over his father's place, if that's the theory.
Donovan Goudreau, Lyle's former best friend. He claimed that Lyle never told him he and Erik had been molested by their father. Luckily, reporter Robert Rand had a taped interview with Donovan long before the abuse defense was made public, where he tells the story of when Lyle did in fact tell him he and Erik had been molested. The prosecution had so many witnesses who were either proven to be lying or directly contradicted each other. And despite that, people continue to quote Craig Signorelli, and they continue to quote Marzi Eisenberg and Dr. Oziel. And it's really kind of sick that these news sites and blogs can lie by omission by claiming these are credible witnesses, and then podcasts and videos quote from these articles. And then pretty soon you've got someone like Paul Zigo, who would normally be empathetic to guys like this, going, oh, maybe they just heard the word no for the first time. And you've got Investigative Discovery putting out videos where they're like, Lyle and Erik were bad kids who never listened to their parents.
His wicked success provided the family with obscene riches, but no amount of cash could keep his kids in line.
And movies with crazy evil Lyle going, Dr. Oziel, I will now kill you. I am evil. Ha ha ha. Or Kendall Ray putting out videos like, oh, Kitty was like excited to be a mom, you guys. This is the big one. First of all, there is so much misinformation out there, especially in YouTube videos and on podcasts. Nobody seems to actually understand what this tape is and what's on it or where it came from. Lots of people, including the podcast I first heard of this case from, are under the impression that this was a secret recording of Erik's initial confession during his October 31st therapy session. And that's not what this is.
October 1989, when Erik admits to his therapist that he murdered his parents, and for some reason his therapist does absolutely nothing with this information. But you know who does? The therapist's mistress, who just happens to be listening from the waiting room with a tape recorder.
Okay, now Judalon recorded the confession tape, apparently. You see what I mean? No one knows what this thing is. So let's talk about what this tape is and why it matters to the prosecution. Because that's the other thing. Most of these videos and podcasts seem to think that the fact that they confessed is the only thing about this tape. So Erik does confess to his therapist. That session is not being taped because you actually can't secretly record therapy sessions. Erik's therapist, Dr. Oziel, then calls Lyle, gets him to come down to his office, and tells him Erik confessed. Of course, Oziel, Lyle, and Erik, and Judalon Smith, who's listening at the door, all have different versions of this night. Oziel says Lyle threatened him, and that's why he wanted to get them on tape. Judalon says Lyle did not threaten him. Oziel implies he'd go to the police unless the boys do something to placate him. Either way, the boys come back after this initial confession, and this tape is made. And it's not spontaneous, and it's decided ahead of time what's going to be talked about on this tape. And the reason this tape is important to the prosecution is because, according to them, it's evidence that this was a pre-planned murder. It's really not, though, and we're going to talk about why that is. Firstly, even Oziel admits that these are his theories on why this killing took place. Lyle and Erik say they did not want to tell Oziel the real reason because they didn't trust him and they never wanted to reveal the sexual abuse.
He said that he was trying to tell the therapist things to make him feel better, but that the therapist was more interested in his financial affairs.
So they agree to go along with Oziel's theory to placate him. The defense had experts evaluate this tape, and they concluded it was not reliable for several reasons. Number one, it's almost all talking by Oziel, and he's incredibly leading and manipulative on the tape. Lyle does agree with him, but he never brings up any of these points himself. He agrees after Oziel says them and uses Oziel's language. Essentially, Oziel gives him the answer and then Lyle repeats it back. Just like that Jake Paul, Shane Dawson interview we looked at before on this channel. Even though Lyle is making this effort to agree, both brothers say many things on the tape that go directly against Oziel's theory. That they killed their dad out of hatred and their mom out of pity. And they make statements more in line with the version of events they testified to. Statements like, I had no choice, I never thought it would actually happen. These statements make no sense in the context of a planned killing.
And when you get to line 12 of this monologue, he makes the statement that it was a very, then a dangerous situation. Yes. Now, is that language that you would want to follow up on when you're dealing with two young men who have killed their parents, and they're trying to talk to you about reasons?
Yes, you would, because of the word that is used. That's a powerful word, a strong word, and one always tries to follow up on powerful words.
And in your opinion, is that cognitively dissonant with the notion of a decision to carry out a mercy killing?
Yes, it is.
It could have happened at any moment. You see that language?
Yes, I do.
And then I want you also to consider the language that Lyle uses on page 45, starting at line 7. We knew what we felt, and we knew everything about that. Honestly, I never thought it would happen.
Yes.
47-page transcript. Here on line 25 of page 44, Lyle Menendez uses the word planning.
Yes.
Right? Does this statement by Lyle Menendez from page 44, line 24 through 45, line 8, is that inconsistent with or in any way cause you to change your opinion that this was an unplanned homicide?
No, it does not change my opinion.
And would you explain why it does not?
The reason for that is that the happened at any moment is clearly a reactive response. That isn't something that is consistent with planning.
This is right at the end of Dr. Oziel's speech, in which he uses the word control and controlling to describe Jose Menendez 13 separate times. He's the only person talking about control. He's the only person talking about hate. He's the only person saying negative things about Jose Menendez. But at the end of his control, and here's one of them, and here's another one, and it goes on and on, he tries to get Erik involved. And Erik is very emotional. He doesn't want to hear bad things about his parents. He starts to cry. And what he says 3 times in this one paragraph is, what I did because I had no choice.
The tape is worthless. It's completely inconsistent and improperly conducted. Despite the fact that forensic experts determined this was an unplanned crime, there are people who just refuse to believe it wasn't planned. Like, a plan is supposed to occur before the killing, right? But most of what people point to as evidence happened afterwards. The only before is the purchase of the guns. But the thing is, buying guns also supports the idea that they were afraid. Furthermore, they bought shotguns even though they wanted handguns because they needed them immediately. That supports Lyle and Erik's story that they were afraid. If this was planned, they could have waited the 2 weeks to get handguns. Yes, it's true that after the shooting, Lyle and Erik picked up the shells, dumped the guns, and their bloody clothes, but they also left evidence of the gun purchase and ammunition in their car and then called 911 with all that evidence just sitting there. They never even washed their hands. They just got lucky that the cops were too stupid to do a gunshot residue test on them. But to truly illustrate to you why this was not a planned crime, I'm going to compare it to 2 planned crimes that were actually very similar in motivation to what the prosecution claimed Lyle and Erik's motivation was. Sarah Marie Johnson, who killed her parents to inherit the house and be with her forbidden boyfriend, and Jennifer Pan, who killed her parents to escape their control. The reason one would plan a crime would be to get away with it. Jennifer attempted to distance herself from the crime by hiring hitmen to do it. Sarah used gloves, a bathrobe, and a shower cap to shield herself from blood and to not leave fingerprints. Lyle and Erik didn't take any action before the shooting to hide their involvement. For example, instead of using the Donovan Goudreau license, they could have used the fake ID Erik had with his own photo and fake name. They could have worn gloves so they wouldn't have to go back and pick up the shells. Oh, but they had an alibi. Well, not really. They said they were at the movies, but since they couldn't get tickets to a showing already in progress, they had no proof of that. They didn't meet Perry Berman because they were too late and they missed him. Lyle called him after and asked him to meet them at the Cheesecake Factory, but Erik and Lyle never showed. Not a very good alibi, certainly doesn't seem planned in advance. I mean, if this was planned, they would have had a time picked to do the murders, and then a time to meet Perry. Erik wouldn't have been late coming home, that's for sure. Hell, Erik could have picked up movie tickets on his way home. 2 for the 10 o'clock showing, please. Go home, kill the parents at 10, and then show the cops the movie tickets. The point of an alibi is to prove that you were somewhere. They never met Perry, so that's not an alibi. Both Sarah Marie and Jennifer Pan said that they were at home when their murders occurred. You might think it's dumb to place yourself at home, but they had to because people would see them coming in and out of their house. So if they said that they were somewhere else, but witnesses can place them at home, that wouldn't be smart. It's smart to say you were where people can say they saw you. Erik and Lyle, meanwhile, created all kinds of opportunities for people to see that they were home. First, anyone could see Erik coming home shortly before the shooting. Erik and Lyle ran out of the house to get the guns, then back in, then back out for the reload, back in, and then back out to leave. And of course, people could see their car leaving and driving away from the house. Nobody would plan something like that. This was all something done in a state of panic, and the overkill at the crime scene actually supports that. The prosecution was never able to prove this, and yet it's an idea that has become synonymous in this case. Erik and Lyle did not kill their parents for money. First of all, why would they have to? Erik, and especially Lyle, spent tons of money while their parents were alive, and it was never a problem. Usually, in a case where someone kills for money, you can point to something specific they needed or wanted the money for. Yes, they spent a lot of money after the killings, but there wasn't anything Lyle and Erik bought that they couldn't have bought before the killings. Second of all, Lyle and Erik both thought they'd been disinherited. I said this in my last video as well, but you can't think you're disinherited and also think you'll inherit. You cannot think both of those things at the same time. And this wasn't just something that Lyle and Erik said. A lot of witnesses testified that Lyle and Erik clearly believed they were disinherited, or that Jose had told them Lyle and Erik were disinherited. Oh, I hear some of you saying, maybe they did it because they wanted to make sure they got the money before Dad changed the will. Uh-huh. Then don't you think they would have done it sooner? Like around the time their dad actually told them they were disinherited, which was about a year before the shooting? They also knew that their dad had not yet taken this physical for a life insurance policy he was supposed to get through work. If this was for money, don't you think they would have waited for him to do that? This was one of the absolute dumbest things to come from the prosecution, and that is really saying something. This all comes from everyone's favorite source of information, Dr. Oziel, of course. He claims that Erik got the idea to kill his father after seeing a movie about the billionaire boys club case. And also, don't you love how they have Dr. Oziel come and testify and say that Erik was the mastermind, and then they also have Craig Signorelli come in and say that it was all Lyle's idea? And they just put those two witnesses on. 'Cause what's one more contradiction, I guess? Anyways, there are a few problems with this. Number one, Judalon Smith testified that it was Oziel who had been watching this miniseries that aired the days before the shooting, so that's most likely where he got the idea. Erik and Lyle were in Florida at a tennis camp when the thing aired, and most importantly, Erik would not have needed to see a movie to learn about this case. He went to high school with the son of one of the victims of this case. One of the prosecutors, Lester Kuriyama, loved bringing this BBC thing up, though. He acted like there were a ton of similarities in these two cases, but that just isn't true. So, the Billionaire Boys Club was this social club run by a young man named Joseph Henry Hunt. It was essentially a Ponzi scheme where Joseph and his friends just blew all the money people invested on their lavish lifestyles. The BBC then gets swindled out of a couple million by this guy, Ron Levin, and eventually, Hunt and his buddy Jim Pittman are arrested for the murder, although Levin's body is never actually found. As you can see, there's pretty much no connection at all between these two crimes, other than the fact that they were also from Beverly Hills, and I guess the rich kid aspect. Ah, but maybe it's this mini-series where the similarities come in, right? Well, in the mini-series, there's this part where they try to kidnap this one guy's dad because the kid wants the dad's money, and he's killed, but it's accidental. He, suffocates after being locked in a trunk. It doesn't resemble the Menendez case at all. More importantly, it's just stupid. They saw a movie where a dad is killed, and so then they decide to kill their dad? If anyone bought this argument, I don't even know. It's second of all, high school drama? Really? I think we're all aware of the caliber of performance that comes from a high school drama class.
You know, we're just prolonging the inevitable. We're dying. As in dead. No more. Nothing.
Third, how does this argument account for Lyle? He never took a drama class, and he was the one who did most of the crying. Erik showed emotion, yes, but he wasn't the one up there bawling his eyes out. That was Lyle. I got so many comments on my last video that were like, it's not even hard to fake cry. Well, first of all, yes it is. Second of all, I have actually worked in the casting department for several films, and I will tell you, most people cannot act. Furthermore, there were 2 movies made in 1994 where they reenacted the testimonies. These were professional actors who were casted in a real movie that aired on TV. These guys do this for a living, and they cannot recreate that emotion. They had the tapes to study and everything.
And was there some point when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And what was it?
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
He said, I don't mean to hurt you. I love you. He said bad things would happen to me if I ever told anyone.
I just told him that I didn't want to do this. And that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
If you honestly make the acting argument, you're deluding yourself. I touched on this briefly in my last video, and I wanted to explain this more. The homophobia that came into play during this trial revolved around the prosecution constantly trying to prove that Erik was gay. The reason they did this, they claim, is because they had this theory that the family secret wasn't sexual abuse, it was Erik being gay. Which, of course, doesn't make sense. You can't take the events that led up to the shooting, take out sexual abuse, plug in Erik is gay, and have it make any sense. But the reason that theory makes no sense is because that wasn't the real reason they did it. They had a secret agenda, and that was utilizing homophobia. They wanted to prejudice jurors against Erik and distract them with this issue. So what they were doing with these questions was what I like to call seed sprinkling, just throwing out some seeds and seeing if any ideas plant in the minds of the jurors. Well, let's throw out, it was the real family secret, see if that does anything. And we'll throw out, these were just stories of consensual acts that Erik did. Okay, we'll see, how about Lyle and Erik were incestuous? Let's see if that one grows anything. Maybe, let's throw out, he liked it. I'm sure that'll grow something.
Told your brother that you loved him, and you stayed with him the rest of that day. Did you stay in his king-size bed in his upstairs bedroom in the guest house?
That night I did.
You stayed in the bed with him?
Yes.
Now, did you sleep with Lyle that night as well?
The things you've testified to, is that a figment of your imagination then, in this trial?
No.
Is that based on things that you would like to have had happen, that you could testify to?
I definitely would rather that the things that happened to me had not happened, that's for sure.
And the sick part is, it worked. According to Hazel Thornton, who was on Erik's jury, there were a number of male jurors who were successfully distracted by this issue and didn't want to talk about anything else. And I know the 90s were not exactly the dark ages, but there was still a lot of prevalent homophobia, especially in older people, and all they needed was one. All they needed was one, and it worked. Erik and Lyle should have just gone to the police. They would have helped them. Yes, of course. The police are well known for protecting and believing teenage boys. I'm sure they would have helped Lyle and Erik. Just like they helped Conarax and Thossenphone right back into Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, right? They would have believed them, just like they believed Robert Donnelly that he was assaulted by John Wayne Gacy, right? And those were strangers. You think an 18 and a 21-year-old were gonna walk into a police station in Beverly Hills in 1989 and tell them that their parents did that, and that they would have been believed? This is a weird one. I guess it's just a way to make the parents look even more defenseless. Pro-prosecution people never want to admit that Kitty and Jose were standing when they were shot. The fact is, there was one empty glass on the coffee table and it was never analyzed to find out what was in it. There was no food or bowls or anything like that found in the crime scene. And while we're on the topic, Kitty was not filling out Erik's UCLA application either. That was not found. Erik was already accepted. That's one of the catalysts that led to these events. Also, anyone who's attended university would know you kind of have to apply a little before August 20th to get into a September semester. The screenplay, one of the dumbest little factoids people mention in this case. It's so irrelevant. See, in high school, Erik Menendez and Craig Signorelli, that's the part people leave out, wrote this screenplay about a kid who murders his parents and inherits $157 million. Or he murders his father, not even his parents. So, people like to say that this is proof this was a planned killing for financial gain. Once again, not accounting for Lyle, since he didn't write it, but whatever. Teenagers tend to write about edgy topics like murder because they think it makes their work more sophisticated. More importantly though, like I said, this was co-authored by Craig. It was rejected as evidence because of that very reason. There's literally no way of proving which ideas were Craig's and which ideas were Erik's, not to mention the fact that Kitty actually typed this up for them. And what about Lyle's creative writing project? You know, he once wrote an essay about a guy who kills a child molester. Does that prove their motive? Certainly proves Lyle had the concept of protecting someone from being molested on his mind. Now, I'm not trying to use that as some kind of trump card. I'm just saying, if you consider one, consider the other. So, I hope you now have a better understanding of some of the myths and lies about this case that you will inevitably hear whenever anyone talks about it. If you are interested in learning more about this case, I would definitely suggest going over to Court TV and watching the full trial. It is very long, though. I would also suggest reading Robert Rand's book. He was the reporter I talked about earlier with the Donovan Goudreau tape. He was there. He wrote a book. It's probably the best book that's ever been written on the topic. I also want to say that I did notice I got a lot of new subscribers, so I want to thank you all. That means so much to me. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you continue to enjoy the videos that I post on this channel. So I will see you all next time.